Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, New and Notable Novels in Verse from Random House Children's Books. I am Ronny Khuri, Books for Youth Senior Editor at Booklist. My pronouns are he and him. And before we begin, I will go over some technical details. So if you're in the audience, you are in listen-only mode, but we do welcome any questions that you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. So if you have a question or if you need technical assistance, just click Q&A and type your message into the box that pops up. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we can pass along all other questions to today's panelists. That way they'll have a chance to follow up with you after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all of our webinars. So to enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the aforementioned toolbar. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. Okay, so in today's program, we will hear from 4 wonderful authors about their new novels in verse. And we will begin with a brief introduction from each author. And then after that, we will move on to the panel portion of the webinar. And we will begin with Mae Respicio. Mae writes novels full of hope and heart. Her debut, The House That Lou Built, received the Asian Pacific American Library Association Honor Award in Children's Literature and was an NPR Best Book of the Year. She's also the author of the acclaimed Any Day With You and How to Win a Slime War. Welcome, Mae. Please tell us a little bit about ISABEL in Bloom.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ronny. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to hear about everyone's stories. So my upcoming novel in verse is ISABEL in Bloom. This comes out on April 9th of next year, 2024. And this book is all about a 12-year-old girl named Isabel. And Isabel is someone who's only seen her mom 5 times in 5 years. And that's because her mom made the decision to leave Isabel and their family and their home in the Philippines to go to the United States to become a nanny to take care of another family. And one day Isabel gets this call. The book is set in 1999, and she learns that it's time for her to just drop everything, leave her friends, leave the people that she's known to become her parents in the Philippines, her grandparents, and she's going to be reunited with her mom, who she feels that she doesn't know. And so Isabel, she gets onto a plane and she flies nearly 4,000 miles from Manila to San Francisco on her own to begin her journey and her new life in this new country with a mom that she doesn't know. And so that point when she moves to California is when the book begins. And so I'm really excited to share this story. Part of it is when she moves to California, she meets this group of friends and they find this dried up old garden. And that's what really helps Isabel to reconnect with her mom and to really begin to explore what home is and where home is for her. So I'm excited for April for everyone to read this book. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mae. Next, we will meet Andrea Beatriz Arango. Andrea is the Newbery Honor-winning author of Eva Lee's Explains It All. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico and is a former public school teacher with almost a decade of teaching experience. Andrea now writes the types of children's books she wishes students had had more access to. She balances her life in Virginia, well, maybe former life in Virginia, with trips home to see her family and eat lots of tostones de pana. When she's not busy writing, you can find her enjoying nature in the nearest forest or body of water. Thank you for joining us, Andrea. Tell us about Something Like Home.
Thank you, Ronnie. And yes, I need to update my online bios. I am no longer in Virginia. I am now in New Orleans, Louisiana. So if you are in the state of Louisiana, please reach out for school visits. My second book is Something Like Home, and I am so excited to be here with these talented authors that I admire so much to talk about it today. Something Like Home is about Laura, who is a rising sixth grader whose parents go to rehab, and she's about to enter foster care when this aunt that she doesn't really know and doesn't really have a relationship with kind of steps up, agrees to be her guardian. And so Laura enters kinship care, which is basically foster care, but when you're residing with someone who is a family member or an adult who has a connection to your family. And so she moves from the trailer park where she was living with her parents to kind of the rich side of town where her aunt, who's a doctor, lives, and she has to start at a brand new school and make brand new friends. So it's a lot of transitions to be making when you don't even know the person you're living with either. So Laura's going through a lot, and she doesn't necessarily agree with social services decision. Who would? So yeah, and amidst all this change, she finds a pit bull puppy, that's Sparrow, in the cover. And she decides to train Sparrow to be a therapy dog because in the book, she's having a hard time getting social services to allow her to visit her parents in rehab. And one day she notices that on the rehab website, there's a picture of a dog with like a therapy dog vest on it. And so she becomes convinced that if she can just train Sparrow to be a therapy dog, that's her way in to finally see her parents and talk to them and kind of figure a way out of this whole mess. So I'm really excited for everyone to read it. It came out a month and a half ago, so very recently, and it's actually coming out in Spanish as well in 2 weeks. So in either language, I'm happy to talk and share about it today.
Thank you so much. Next up, let's hear from Kelly J. Baptist. Kelly is the inaugural winner of the We Need Diverse Books short story contest. Her story is featured in the We Need Diverse Books anthology, Flying Lessons and Other Stories, and inspired her first full-length novel, Isaiah Dunn is My Hero, and its sequel, Isaiah Dunn Saves the Day. Kelly is also the author of the picture book, The Electric Slide in Kai, and The Swag is in the Socks, which was inspired by her love of unique socks, as well as her older sister's hero work as a speech language pathologist. Kelly lives in Southwest Michigan with her 5 amazing children, and you can find Kelly at Kelly Is Right, that's WRITE.com. Welcome, Kelly. Let's hear about Ebb and Flow.
Thank you, Ronnie, and good afternoon to everyone and to my fellow panelists. I'm very excited to be here with you. I'm in very good company, and that is exciting. And so Ebb and Flow, I'll hold this one up first because that's the book. But what's really important is this one, and that is where the story started. And I like to go with the story behind the story. And in that nutshell, it's 2 kids, 1 fight, a 10-day suspension, and no one thinks they're wrong. The story behind the story for Ebb and Flow is that I started writing it on a cold and snowy Saturday in February. And I knew it was February because we were just a few weeks after my hero, Kobe Bryant, had passed. So this was 2020. And I thought, what better way to honor him than to activate Mamba mentality? And even though I'm sad, sit down and start writing. And that is what I did in this notebook. My first words were, from Flow's perspective, I don't hit girls, was my very first sentence. And I went on to tell his side of the fight. And then I went to Ebony, or Ebb, her perspective, and shared her side of the fight. And when I went into work at a middle school on that following Monday morning, guess what? There was a fight between a male and female student upstairs in my building. And as I walked the young man down to the guidance office, he was upset. He was emotional. He was loud. And I was just trying to calm him down. And he said, man, I don't even hit girls. And that moment solidified to me that this was a story that needed to be told because it was relevant. That was my confirmation moment, really. And I continued the story, and we just kind of follow these kids as they are suspended. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are their friends doing and saying? We're in a social media age where things that happen at school get posted. And so how are you dealing with that while you're at home? And then what is your home situation? What is the point of suspension? I was thinking about all of these things as I wrote Ebb and Flow. And it was released March of this year, and very excited to talk about it with my fellow panelists today. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. And our final introduction will come from Olivia A. Cole. Olivia is a writer from Louisville, Kentucky, whose essays have been published by Bitch Media, Real Simple, the Los Angeles Times, HuffPost, Teen Vogue, Gay Mag, and more. Olivia is the author of several books for children and adults. Thank you for being here, Olivia. Take it away.
Thank you. And Kelly, thank you for everything you said. I actually have a Kobe Bryant related story for this as well. I won't tell it right now. I'll save it for one of the later questions, but that's interesting. So Ariel Crashes a Train comes out in March. So just a few months away. It's my second novel in verse. And this one is about a young person named Ariel who things are kind of falling apart for. Ariel's having a hard time. She feels like she's broken. She feels like there's something wrong with her brain. She is always getting distracted by kind of violent, intrusive thoughts. She's afraid that she's going to hurt the people around her. And so she's kind of built this safety, net. She's got her safe people. She's got her sister and she's got her best friend. And but then, when you put all your eggs or, your 2 eggs that you only have in one basket, things get broken. So her sister has gone off to college, and now her best friend is going to Washington, D.C. for the summer, leaving Ariel alone, she feels, with these thoughts, and she's kind of spiraling. So really what this book is about obsessive compulsive disorder. She's undiagnosed. She has no idea what that is, but that's what's happening to her. And OCD will really mess your life up. So that's kind of what's happening to Ariel. And it feels very hopeless until she starts her summer job at the local carnival that comes every summer. She has done it every year, but usually she has her safe person, her best friend, with her. So this is her first year doing it alone. And she meets some new friends and they open her up. So there's a lot of love and a lot of fear and a lot of theory in this book. And I'm really excited to talk about it. I'm in such great company. I feel like all of these different, I see why you guys put us together. There's a lot of things that are crossing over here. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now that we've met everybody, I can invite you all to turn on your cameras if you like, and we will get into panel mode. Activate. And I'm gonna start us off, hello, with kind of a follow-up introductory question, and let's go in reverse order so we can start with Olivia. But I'm always curious how authors, especially prolific authors who have various ideas, decide on their next project. Like, how do you know what your next book is? So I want to ask each of you, in the context of your journey as an author, what led you to this project at this moment or whenever you wrote it? So Olivia, you can kick us off.
I guess I'll tell the Kobe story now. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of us will relate to this, just not the Kobe part, but just the fact that, the story finds us. The thing that, and also similar to Kelly, what you're saying, like, feeling that validation of, you'll have this little seed and then something will water it. So I have OCD, among other things, but it's really tough. And 2020 was a tough year for people with OCD. I don't have like hand washing or germ OCD. Mine kind of goes, well, it's kind of part of it, but it's complicated. But OCD will take over your life. And for 2020, with the beginning of the pandemic, that definitely happened. But for part of it for me, really, when I realized I need to get help for this was when Kobe Bryant died. I had a very young child at that point. She's 6 now, but I had read this article that like the first 3 years of a child's life are the most dangerous. So many things can happen when they're so little. And the fact that Kobe's daughter was with him during that, tragic accident, it just really burrowed into my head. And I was like, oh my God, there's nothing I can do to protect my child ever. And the thoughts just kept coming and coming. And I had dealt with it my whole life and had my various rituals and, all the things. But as Ariel finds out in this book, those rituals really don't help you. They really make things worse. And I really spiraled after Kobe, and I was constantly worried about my now ex-husband and my daughter. And yeah, I was like, wow, this feels like a thing. There's something wrong. This can't be normal. And like Ariel, I felt there's something wrong with me. Like there's something really wrong with my brain. And so it's been a journey, but the journey really started with that book. And so I wrote with Ariel's story kind of as I was going through this, and then it evolved and transformed. But it really started with Kobe.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Kelly, let's go to you. So again, in the context of your career and your writing journey, what led to this project?
Well, I'm glad I get to follow that, Olivia, because we have a lot in common that we didn't even know. So I'll go into my kind of Kobe story. Like I'm a huge fan, and so that was devastating to me. And I remember the day that I sat down to write this story. I was just very sad. And so that's what I used as kind of a cathartic release from the sadness I was feeling. And I just sat down on the couch. I had music playing like extremely loud. I sent my children away because I was crying and writing and all of that at the same time. And the idea had kind of been ruminating. I got the title first, and I kind of like play on word kind of titles. And it's something I heard Kobe say too. He was giving an interview and he was talking about the ebbs and flows of life. I was like, I like that, ebb and flow. How can I make that work? So a lot of connections to him. It's funny what you said too. In 2020, I got divorced as well. So I also have an ex-husband. Olivia, you're my spirit author, perhaps. So it was a tough year, but I found this really a joy to write. And usually I will pick up a project only after I finish another project. And you ask the question, what makes you choose your project? And it's the one that speaks most and loudest and longest, even if I'm working on something else. And so that's what happened with this. And I never got bored with it. I never felt I needed to rush to something else. And I wrote in a notebook, 2 different colors, a color for ebb, a color for flow. And that's kind of how I came to this project. So a little bit of grief, but also a lot of questions, related to my work in a middle school.
Thank you. Andrea, doesn't have to be about Kobe, but it can be.
No, mine is definitely not. But so I'm gonna break the pattern here. But we still can have a smooth transition because I was teaching middle school during the pandemic and around the time when I was writing this book, which teaching and writing at the same time, very hard thing, do not recommend. But I have a lot of ideas, and usually I keep them in kind of a little folder. And so this book is actually a recycled idea from years and years ago that has kind of morphed. 15 years ago, I got into my head after a conversation with my mom that I wanted to write a chapter book series for like elementary students with a therapy dog in it. And at the time I was really obsessed with like House and Grey's Anatomy. And I think I was envisioning like every book has like a wild medical case and this dog somehow like helps the doctors. I don't know. Obviously that's not what it is now. But back then, there was no cloud, that automatically saved all your things. And I was terrible at backing up my actual work. And so my computer died, and with it, this manuscript, and it's fine. It's for the best, really. But when I decided to revisit the idea of a therapy dog book, I had changed a lot as a person. And, like I said, it was during the pandemic. I was teaching middle school. In the book, Laura really struggles with reading. She does reading intervention. And those were some of those things when we all went virtual, when we were all at home, kids who already were not at the academic level that, teachers wanted them to be, really had a hard time. And then on top of that, I had been fostering teenage girls, much older than Laura. These were like proper teens, but so foster care, became a part of my life in a very personal way. And so this therapy dog idea that I had 15 years ago kind of turned into a new version of it that reflected like who I was at the moment and what were the things that were really like weighing heavy on my mind, and especially during the pandemic, because kids in foster care were also very much affected. And it was just all those were the complicated thoughts going through my head, and so the idea kind of turned into what it is now, and I'm very happy about it. I think this is a far better version than my original idea, for sure.
It's interesting to see also just how, like in this period, what kind of books are coming out of the pandemic and that whole stretch. Mae, what about you? What led you to this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing everyone's stories. And actually, there's a pandemic thread in my story as well. We were at the very start of the shutdown in 2020, and that was around the time that I should have been figuring out my next book. And it was such a hard time for everyone. My kids were home, and we were just having a hard time getting through everything. And something in my head thought, well, I was watching my kids try to navigate this huge change in their lives. And that really sparked the idea of a kid going through change. And I didn't know what that meant at all at the time. But it really grew into this story of, what happens when your life is turned upside down. Everything is completely different. And how do you deal with that? And how does that change you? How does that affect your lens? So, maybe the one good thing that came out of 2020 was that idea was born. But if I'm talking about it in the sort of context of my writing journey, I like to think about the why, like what led me to writing that type of story. And, I know a lot of authors of color share that, for me, I was a kid in the 80s. There were no books at all, not a single one that had any Filipino American characters. And fast forward to when I first became a mom, and I remember my husband and I had put together this bookshelf for our future son's bedroom, and I thought, oh gosh, there must be books now that have Filipino American kids in them. Let's, fill this bookshelf. And we used to live in walking distance to a Barnes and Noble. I remember actually walking into the Barnes and Noble and asking, can you give me some titles so I can stick a couple books in our bookshelf? And the person was like, oh gosh, I don't really know. They looked in the computer, but there was nothing. And then I went to the library and I asked the librarian, and I remember she was so sweet and so apologetic. And she was like, gosh, there's not really anything here. And that was back in 2007. That's not very long ago. And so for me, that was really the point when I thought, well, I want to write this book for my future kids and for my past self. So let me figure out what that means. And so that was really the longer writing journey to getting to write the kinds of books that I write today, which are books about all kinds of things, but really have a Filipino American kid at their center and at their core.
Thanks everybody for those answers. One of the obvious connecting threads among your books is that these are all novels in verse. So I want to shift into talking a little bit about poetry. And maybe we can start with Andrea on this. I think you're 2 for 2 on novels in verse, and you're kind of building a career around that at the moment. So I guess my general question is, how do you know a book needs to be in verse? And how do you approach writing for your audience, so whether that's the age range or the genre?
Yeah, I think I tend to have sometimes a different answer to what I think other novelists in verse have, because many that I have met, consider themselves to be like true poets, and the poetry is kind of what calls to them. And for me, I mentioned that I was a teacher for a long time. I decided to take a break at the end of last year's school year, so I'm currently not teaching. But when I was teaching English language learners. So all the refugees, all the immigrants, any kid who needed kind of English language intervention. And a big frustration for me as their teacher and for them as students was that these were kids who were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and wanted books with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders going through like middle school type things, but they were just not reading at that like level. And so they were being given like chapter books, meant for like 2nd or 3rd graders. And so for me, writing in verse is more so a practical thing than it is a poetic thing. Because I do think that novels in verse kind of serve the same function as graphic novels sometimes, and that they allow children to read these like chunkier, like 250-page books that look like the books that everybody else is reading, but are just a lot more accessible to them in terms of not just like fluency and decoding of the actual words, but just also in terms of stamina, because sometimes kids, they may sound like they're reading really proficiently, but getting through like 10 pages at a time is just such a burden. And with books in verse, you have so few words on the page. When you look at word count, you're probably looking at like a third of the word count of a traditional book in prose. And so for me, that's why I've been writing in verse, because they are my audience. And not just English language learners, but, all of the middle schoolers who should probably be receiving more support in school. But unfortunately, only about like 30% of middle schools have like reading interventionists at this point in time. Like after you pass elementary school, those like support systems kind of fall away a little bit. So yeah, they're my audience. And so that's why I write in verse. I definitely have a more minimal style, than a lot of other authors. And I don't play too much with like really complicated, like concrete poems or stuff like that. And that's why.
It's great. Excuse me. I think that's a completely valid approach. I mean, accessibility and literacy are pretty important. So, Mae, let's take it over to you. You actually, if I'm remembering right, included at the end some poetry prompts and things like that too, which I thought was really cool. But what was it that made you think this had to be in verse?
Yeah, so I wrote the entire novel at first in prose, the whole thing. And the original version had 12 poems interspersed throughout the story. And when I got my first edit letter back from my editor, she had one comment that said, I love the emotional push behind these poems. Can you do a little bit more of that? And I said, sure, I can do that. And the more I did, the more the poems kept on multiplying and multiplying until I thought, maybe this should be in verse. And so we had that conversation. And luckily with my editor, we thought, yeah, this novel should probably be in verse. And that's not necessarily how I recommend writing a verse novel to anyone. It took a long time. I had never written in verse before, so it was a big learning curve for me. But my editor was right. And I think the emotional heart really came from being able to just, there's something about poetry where you can just pack such a powerful punch in just a few words, just a few lines, or even just in the white space, that allowed me to really find what the novel was about. And so somehow, yeah, the verse format really worked for what I saw Isabel's journey to be and what her emotional journey was. So it took a long time, but eventually it got there.
Olivia, what about you?
So I was a poet before I was a novelist. From when I was very, very young, poetry was always like my thing. I published poems in high school and in college. I minored in poetry in college. And then I dove into writing science fiction and prose, novels, and I just kind of got away from it. And then when I wrote Dear Medusa, which came out last year, which that felt like at the time the last book I would ever write. I was just in such a bad place with so many things. But I was like, well, if I'm going to write my last book, then it's going to be, poetry. And Dear Medusa is very much, yeah, like my story. It just feels a lot like me. And so it was the kind of natural way to go. And then it wasn't my last book, still here. And then Ariel Crashes a Train came to me, and that's another piece of me that just feels very close to the heart. And it just felt, again, natural. Also, there's a lot of chaos in both of these books. And I feel like the sparsity of verse just kind of gives more room for chaos somehow. And then also what you said, Mae, about the white space. There's so much power in white space, and like emptiness. And both of these young women in both of these books have so much emptiness that they're trying to fill. And having that visually happen on the page, I think, was just necessary. So I feel like some books just have to be verse, and Ariel Crashes a Train is one of them.
Kelly, I'm pretty sure I read maybe in your acknowledgments that you had a little bit of motivation from poetry legend Ron Khuri, who I think we've both worked with at we both went to Hamlin University. But tell us about kind of how you ended up writing this one in verse.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I sure was going to mention Ron. Because I didn't know this was going to be in verse. I never planned to write in verse. In the workshop with Ron, my very first semester at Hamlin, the manuscript I had submitted for workshop, he was like, "This will work well in verse. You should maybe try some lines or try to do it in verse." And I was just like, "Oh, okay, I'm taking notes. No, I'm not going to do this." I never thought, it never crossed my mind, even though, like Olivia, I grew up loving poetry, writing poetry, loving to put words together in that format, probably before story. It didn't click. And I think for me, maybe it was, I don't think it was the sadness, but just I shared my first line, which was, "I don't hit girls." And I had written that, and it's a short line. And I remember going to the next line, "I don't even hit girls." And that's also short. And I just started writing in a way where I wasn't finishing the whole line. I was like, I kind of like this. And then I was writing over here, and I was skipping a line here. And it just kind of flowed. No pun intended, but that's exactly what was happening with this book. It flowed out that way, and it was not my intention at all. I thought I was doing big things just to do a dual perspective story back and forth between two characters. But that is how the story came. And I think it allowed me to get closer to the characters, and in their minds and their situations and how they felt. Because I think that's a big part of the story, how you feel about a fight, how you feel about being suspended, how you feel about an absent family member, how you feel about being abandoned. And so I felt like verse did lend itself well to tell that story. And Mae, like you, the story I'm working on now started off as prose, and I was feeling a distance from my main character. I was like, I don't feel as close to him as before. And then I had the thought, what if I wrote it in verse? So I was about 120 pages in, and now I'm working on transferring it over. And you are right, it is not the easiest thing in the world. I work with a split screen right now where the original is on this side and the verse, and I'm trying to figure out how to translate it. But it is allowing me to get that closeness, and I think that's what verse does, especially when it's heavier topics, or as Olivia said, chaos, a lot going on. It gives us some grounding and some closeness to the character.
That's perfect. I mean, after reading all four of these books, I'm kind of trying to remember why I ever read prose books, because there's just there's so much value to it, and so many things you can do. So another thing I noticed, another commonality among your books, and I think we'll start with Mae on this one, that I think is just coincidental, but it was interesting that in all of your books, the protagonists are struggling with the absence or the distance maybe of certain loved ones, whether that's a family member or a close friend or just their support system of some kind. But I thought it'd be interesting to ask each of you how you came to that specific element or theme, and what you were exploring around that. So let's kick it off with Mae.
Yeah, I don't know how the other authors do it, but I don't necessarily write to theme as I'm drafting. I mean, I know sort of the general emotional flow of what I want the book to be, but I'm not thinking, oh, theme. And it's not until I get a full draft and I read through it that I think, oh, there's the themes. They magically popped up, resiliency and learning what home is and learning to bloom where you're planted. So for me to get to theme, I usually just think about the story that I want to tell. And in this particular case, I think we're so lucky in middle grade fiction. We have a wonderful array of these rich, diverse stories around immigration. But again, I wasn't seeing anything that was focused on the Filipino-American diaspora. And, within the Filipino diaspora, it is one of the most common stories is for people to leave their families, especially mothers, especially women, to go all around the globe to take care of other people's families, to take care of other people's elders, to take care of other people's homes. And sometimes women don't see their families and their own children for years and years and years. And so, and that was a story that has affected many people that I know, my family included, family friends included. And I just really, for me, thought it was so important to explore that story. I mean, there are a million lenses into what that diaspora story is, but for me, I really just wanted to be able to add that to the bookshelves among this wonderful array of books that we already have around immigration.
Let's go to Olivia. You already mentioned, I think, that Ariel is feeling the absence of her sister and friend. How did that kind of become a core part of the story, even if it's not the core part?
Yeah. So actually, I had read a good friend of mine, Ashley Woodfolk. She's got a lot of just great books, but one that she had shared with me pre-publication is about a friendship breakup. And it was really important to me at the time because I was a new mom, and I was kind of witnessing people kind of fade away out of my life. Things change when you're a parent, and then people who aren't parents don't really want to hang with you because you got your little baby, so it's just like, shifts and transitions. And I also, well, I used to, I'm no longer doing it, but I would teach a summer program here in Kentucky for high schoolers. And I would, get really close with these kids, and I would just be hearing them talk about friendship breakups. And they didn't call it that, but they're like, oh, I'm not friends with her anymore. She used to be my best friend. And I would be reading their poetry, and they wrote about it a lot. And it's devastating, like losing a friend at any age is very hard. But when you're young and you're still kind of forging your identity and learning what boundaries are, and some people are in their 30s and still learning boundaries, but as a teenager, it's just like these are critical times, and you trust people so deeply when you're a teenager. And Ariel, more than trust, it was a codependence thing for her. And so I really wanted to show that her friendship breakup, in this book with her best friend going to DC, it's not so much a breakup as it is a healthy boundary that is being set. And I kind of just wanted to have that on the page of like, sometimes friends need to be apart for a while, and it doesn't mean that this is forever. It doesn't mean that it's bad or anybody's to blame. It's just like, sometimes you need that, and that can be healthy, and it doesn't have to, break your heart. Maybe it'll always break your heart, but also like you can heal from that. And then so that's a big part of it. And then also I grew up, I have two older sisters from my dad's previous marriage, and we never lived under the same roof. Now that we're older, we're much closer, but I kind of I've been writing about sisters a lot lately. My middle grade that came out this year, Where the Lockwood Grows, is about sisters. And there's just something special about sisters. And I wanted to really have that on the page as well. This person that Ariel trusts so deeply and is so scared to lose, but also there needs to be boundaries there too. Just because it's your blood doesn't mean that, you're going to be like this, so tight. So boundaries. I'm glad you asked this question, because I've been thinking about boundaries a lot. And that's what's happening in Ariel Crashes a Train. Also because, sorry, I'm talking too long now, but Ariel also, she had the wrong kind of boundaries. She would have these very strict boundaries between her and friends and people she loves, because she doesn't want anyone to know what's really going on inside her head, because she thinks people will run the other direction when they, think she's going to be a serial killer or something, which is a very real fear of hers. But then she also doesn't. So she has that strong boundary, but then also she has, too loose of a boundary with her sister, who is kind of having to shoulder all of this responsibility and just tough stuff happening with Ariel. And it's like, well, that's not your job. You need a therapist. So, actually, that's something we can talk about in the book, is it like your sister's not your therapist. You need a therapist to be your therapist. So yeah, sorry, that was a lot.
No, that was great. Do not apologize. Thank you. Let's go to Kelly. Both of your characters are feeling the absence of a parent and some others, and the distance especially. And it seemed to me to be sort of a crux of your book at some point, but I'm curious if that was a conscious choice, like that parallel, and kind of how you got there.
Yeah, boundaries though, Olivia. I was talking about that with my therapist today. So like, this is a panel that was meant to be. And I love when stuff like that happens, where you see all the connections and it's truly meant to be. So for me, I wanted to address realities and also come at some stereotypes. Ebb and Flow are Black kids. They live in a very loving and close-knit community. I think you can feel that, but it's not the most affluent. So the stereotype is, or the thought is, if their dad is not in the home or the picture, he's the deadbeat dad somewhere who doesn't love or take care of his kids. So I kind of wanted to come at that stereotype for a father's absence, and then turn it on its head. And though it's a reality, a lot of times you don't know the story behind the story. So why prejudge? And that's a lesson for Ebb and Flow to learn, even as they are relating to each other, but also for the adults in their lives, and the adults who read this, and the adults who pass this on to kids. It's a lesson for all of us to really pay attention to and look for the story behind the story. And so I wanted to talk about things that drive behavior. Sometimes we see the behavior and we just think, you're a bad kid, or you're an aggressive, this is an angry kid. But why? How would you deal with, your dad not being there? You would struggle at 30. So imagine being 11 and having to bear this weight. And both the dads, well, I don't know how much to give away, whatever. I don't know what people have read, but they're gone. That is true. That's a reality. But it is not for the reason that our minds would naturally go to. And once that's discovered, hopefully, it just opens the door for greater understanding and empathy. That's really what I was going for. And to show the students, Ebb and Flow, and the young people who read, that they were able to not become best friends, because that's not always the goal. But if you can treat each other with kindness and respect, that is hero activity, in my opinion, especially when you ask that of a young person. So that's kind of what I was going for by having the dads in particular absent. I know mom was there, but not there for Ebb and her side of the story. And then I also wanted to show what happens when community members step up and try to fill that void, and the importance that you can play in a person's life, even if you're not related by blood. Just being there, giving advice, giving a ride, giving food, providing what's needed in that moment, how powerful that can be as well.
Yeah, I love how you subverted that. I think I won't say too much either, but you did it. Yeah, it works. Andrea, it's interesting that you said you kind of started more with the dog, but tell us about some of the focus on family, I guess, and the distance there.
Yeah, I'm glad that Kelly said the stuff about subverting stereotypes, because on any given day there's about like 400,000 kids in foster care, and if you go by like the books and the movies and the TV shows that show foster care, you would think that like every single parent is like a terrible, evil, abusive parent, and that's why the kids are in foster care. But the reality is like 3 out of 4 kids are in foster care because of what is termed neglect, which can sometimes be kind of a not so subtle code word for like being poor. You can't technically remove a kid for being poor, but you kind of can. And so, when I was fostering, it was really hard to find books for my foster daughters where the parents were just not like terrible people. And so with this book, I really wanted to explore a family dynamic that is a reality for a lot of kids, without portraying it in that very binary, like good versus bad kind of way. Like Laura's parents in the book, like they really love her and they are truly trying their best. You know, they have never done anything to hurt her. And so the separation is very hard on them, and it's very hard on Laura, who genuinely wants to be back with her parents and does not want to be with her aunt or with anybody else. And I think that's a true reality of most foster care cases, but that's not what we see in books, and especially not in books for kids. And so I just wanted to kind of approach it in a more realistic way, because I think we can often fall into that like savior complex of like the kids are better off now, but really like the separation itself, it can be way more traumatic than anything that was going on in the kids' home. And so I was just trying to show a little bit of that. And I think because the book is in first person, because it's in verse, you know, you really get to be in Laura's head, and to her, social services are the bad guys, you know, not her parents. And so I'm hoping that other kids reading this, you know, whether or not they have any experience with foster care themselves, will then, you know, be more empathetic and be kinder when they encounter classmates, because they will encounter classmates at some point or another who are going through that, and not just assume like, oh my gosh, your parents must have done something terrible for you to be in foster care, because that is really not the majority of cases.
Thank you. So we probably only have time for one more question. So I'm going to skip to my fave, which I stole, of course, from authors Chris Barton and Jennifer Ziegler have a web series that's called This One's Dedicated To, where they just ask an author about their book's dedication. And I find that sometimes it's just an interesting angle to get at kind of the contents of the book and the, you know, the story behind the story sometimes. But I'll start with Kelly this time. And if you don't mind, could you read your book's dedication and just talk a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So this is for Damien, Markayla, and Trajan. Thank you for inspiring me. Each of you has enough light to inspire the world. I can't wait to see it. And those were three of my students. At the time, they were in 7th grade, and now they are sophomores. And 7th grade was on the 2nd floor in my building. And I would be commissioned to go up there a lot, kids in the hallway, just whatnot. I worked in the guidance office as a social emotional learning interventionist. And so I remember going up one day, and the three of them were outside of a classroom. They had gotten sent out of the classroom. And I just started talking to them. I was in the middle of ebb and flow, kind of in the thick of their suspension. And I know these three had gotten suspended before, a lot. And so I started talking to them about suspension and what they thought about it, and what happened, what they doing, what you guys get on the game, or you used to get out the house, what your parents say, what your mom say. And they were just sharing some of their experiences. And I was like, you know what? When I finish this book, because I'm writing this book right now, when I finish this book, I'm going to dedicate it to you guys. And I am very happy to be able to have kept that promise. And I ran into one of them and was able to show the book. And it was just, yeah, the fact that they're like, wow, you really did it. I said, yeah, I said it. Even though it's been this long, publishing takes a while. You guys are the book's dedication.
That's the best. Andrea, let's go with you.
Yeah, so this book is dedicated to my mom. My first book was dedicated to my dad, who passed away when I was in my 20s. And so this one was for my mom. And it says, Para mi mami, this book was born from your idea. Te amo. Because she was the one who, like I said, originally had the idea for the therapy dog book. So
there you go. Thank you. Olivia, how about you?
Mine is very simple. I think, let me make sure I don't mess it up, but I'm pretty sure it's just for Oman. Yeah, for Oman. That's my ex-husband. And I dedicated to him after we were divorced, because he was I mean, we very amicably, have parted ways. He's just such an important person in my life. And another thing about Ariel Crashes a Train is that Ariel, when I sat down to write this book, I was like, yeah, I'm writing a book about OCD, definitely. But also it ended up being so much a book about gender and how gender is so made up. And Ariel kind of, so I'm non-binary and I don't think I gave my pronouns, but Ariel is kind of getting there. She is realizing like, what is girlhood? What is, is gender an intrusive thought also? And in some ways it really is. And my ex, Oman, he was just so supportive through my journey fighting with OCD. I mean, we were together since we were 20, and I've been OCD and non-binary my entire life, and both of them have, caused me significant challenges. And it all kind of crashed at once. And he was just there for me through all of it, and dealing with the fear and angst and doubt that comes with figuring out who you are and what you need to do to be happy and healthy. So it was kind of a no-brainer to dedicate it to him.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Mae, you can bring us home.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll read my dedication. It's actually to my two grandmothers who have now passed, and it's to my grandmothers, Rosa and Dionisia, whose bountiful gardens I always keep with me. So obviously there's a gardening theme to this book, but full disclosure, I am not the greatest gardener. I don't have a green thumb. My son, actually, he's a teenager and he does. And so those are like his plants that he takes care of over there. But I do feel a very deep connection to gardening through my families. Both sides of my families in the Philippines were gardeners and farmers. My one grandfather had a tobacco farm, and his 8 children, including my dad, worked on the farm drying tobacco leaves. So when both sets of families immigrated to California, which is where I still am, I just remember my grandparents had these beautiful, lush green gardens, which is very possible to have year round in the climate out here. And they always grew their own food. They always made me help with the garden along with my cousins. And so I always knew where my food came from. And so being able to put those two elements of gardening, nurturing things and where your food comes from into this book, really gave me a lot of joy. So that's where my dedication comes from.
Perfect. Thank you, Mae. Thank you, everybody, for sharing yourselves today, for sharing your work. These are truly 4 like really impactful books. I'm lucky I got to read them and talk to you all. So we maybe had a minute left, but we'll go ahead and call the panel here. Thank you again, and I will kind of close things out momentarily. And you're welcome to turn off your cameras if you like, or you can hang with me. Okay, so thanks again. For our attendees, tomorrow you will receive an email containing links to today's video recording and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Between January 1st and August 31st, 2023, ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom documented challenges to 1,915 unique titles, an increase of 20% from the same period in 2022. Join the fight to help protect the freedom to read by supporting the Unite Against Book Bans campaign and visit their website, uniteagainstbookbans.org, for resources, toolkits, merchandise, to donate, and more. And remember that you can utilize Booklist to support your library's collection development choices with reviews backed by the ALA. We have a special webinar subscription offer, and don't forget that your subscription dollars help ALA advocate on behalf of libraries, assisting those facing an unprecedented number of book challenges. Email us at info@booklistonline.com for more information. We have a special announcement. Introducing Booklist's Book Club, a year-long partnership with your favorite publishers. Each month, Booklist will showcase book club picks and supporting materials from a different publisher, offering a wide range of genres and age groups to fit the needs of any book discussion group. This month's sponsor, Macmillan Library, has tons of resources for your book groups. To find out more information, scan the QR code on this slide or visit our website. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our guests, Mae, Andrea, Kelly, Olivia, and to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar. Thanks.